Hello, everyone, and welcome to a brand new episode of Set Listing Bruce, your podcast all about Bruce Springsteen, his music, and mostly his fans. I am your host, Jesse Jackson. We are getting off the Bruce train, but we are doing one of my favorite things, talking to writers, and we are talking whiskey. As you guys have been long fans have known, my wife and I love the Kentucky Bourbon Trail. We've gone 2 or 3 times. I am fascinated by the history of bourbon and how it's a little bit science, a little bit art. And when you throw in with a kind of a mystery and a story built in it, I'm sold. So, Jeff, welcome to the podcast.
Nice to meet you, Jesse.
We're going to be talking about the new book, Whiskey Rebel. It's due out in May, correct?
May
Okay.
6th.
Tell us a little about yourself.
Yeah. So I'm Jeffrey Dunn, and I was raised in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, which is outside of the Rust Belt, coal mines, steel mills, and that led into 41 years of teaching, 15 of them in the Pittsburgh area in the 1980s when 100,000 people left. Steel mills closed down. It was a bad time. Out of that, I published a novel. I imagined myself going back, essentially, and created a character and went back to a kind of magical Appalachian town that had all the bad of the past, but had morphed itself into something good. And he has to deal with that, the past and the present. So there's that novel. And I moved to the Olympic Peninsula in Washington, which is a wild rainforest. It's the only rainforest area in the contiguous 48 states. And out of that came a novel, Radio Free Olympia, which is a very Joycean thing. And then moved to Spokane and taught for 17 years in this area. And all of the geography is so much different. Appalachia, the Cascades, the Olympic Peninsula, the Olympic Mountains. Here, it's the Scablands, along with the Bitterroot Mountains and the Selkirks and the Palouse and all of that. And the Scablands are a place where the giant, we would call it a Great Lakes, Lake Missoula during the time of the Ice Age. There was an ice dam that created this huge lake like Lake Erie, and it cut loose repeatedly and took all the soil off of central Washington, most of it except where it's up high, and that's where the wheat grows. Sent all the soil down to Walla where they grow the onions. They have all of our dirt, and down to the Willamette Valley in Oregon. They have all of our dirt, and then out to the
Wow.
ocean. This novel that comes out, Whiskey Rebel, takes place in the Scablands, the Columbia Gorge Basin, Washington State. All of my writing is very place based, and the places are very different, so the novels are very different.
So I'm fascinated by that. And I'm glad you mentioned that because that was the next question I was going to ask, Jeffrey,
Good.
is it seems like that when people ask the questions, where do you get your inspiration? At least partially, it's the area you're living in, isn't it?
Absolutely. I just like to get out. I'm older now. I don't walk as much as I used to, but just go out and walk. I'm prefer to be outdoors. I have lots of allergies. It just feels better to be outdoors.
Okay.
But geography, flora, fauna, and then that suggests for me to research history. A lot of the geological history, so you go way back, and then human history and the history of the changes in animals and plants. And then out of that come characters. The characters, we just get started, and the characters then take me wherever we're going to go, depending on what the place is and whoever the characters are.
One of my favorite stories, I was at a book signing with Lawrence Block, the mystery
Okay.
writer. In one of his Scudder novels, Matt, the main character, was living with Elaine and he was having an affair on her. I raised my hand at the book signing and I said, does that mean Elaine knows that he's cheating on her? And he says, I think so.
I like that.
He says, or maybe she just, because she in her previous life had been a prostitute, maybe she just knows the flaws of men and assumes that he's doing something. I love that idea that he isn't even sure what the characters know.
Understand that. by the end of the novel.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
I hope I know, I understand where it's coming from. So in Whiskey Rebel, there are two main characters. The Whiskey Rebel is a young man from Western Pennsylvania. He's been told by his grandfather that he's part of the lineage of the Whiskey Rebellion of 1794. He's a drummer who does skiffle, goes out in alleys and plays and has people give him money. He goes on this trip. He goes to New Orleans and he bums around a little bit. His vision in life is to make tax free whiskey just like his three times great grandfather during the Whiskey Rebellion.
Hmm.
So he's got a vision of what he wants to do. His motivation is pretty clear. It's a little bit like Great Gatsby, where he's not the main character because it's the Whiskey Rebel, but he's the person telling the story. So he really is the main character because he's the filter for everything. And he's on a different side of the state where central Washington is very dry, high desert. But Eastern Washington is all very wet, and that's where he grew up. And he's really struggling to figure things out. He ends up joining the military. He tries college, that doesn't work. He joins the military, he gets his brain scrambled in an IED explosion and comes back to the United States. And somebody tells him he should go pan for gold, and he goes up above what's Wenatchee, Washington, and
Hmm.
Pashastin River, and he's panning for gold. And that's when this Whiskey Rebel guy, Hamilton Chance, comes along and shouts down at him, and they go up because neither of them know what they're doing. The book is really, he is his name. It's a pun on the Punxsutawney Phil.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Punxsy is relating all these events to try and figure out the where he fits in America. He doesn't have much faith anymore. So these two guys are just this kind of picaresque buddy novel, but then they get characters around them, people
Yeah.
show up, so to speak. So they're all trying to figure out where to go. And so I'm along for the ride as they interact.
I love that. Where did you grow up? But I'm going to
Sure.
ask you that question too. But I also want to ask, are you a family of readers? So you can go either one first, your choice. Were you a family
I'll
of readers or and also what kind of music were you guys listening to?
Yeah. So I'll do the readers thing, then the music thing. Because I know you do a lot of Bruce stuff, Bruce is an influence on this book. So I'm all ready to talk about that too.
Great.
We'll pull it all together.
Yeah.
My mother was a reader and always took us to the library. I'm dyslexic. My dad, my grandfather, I'm sure all the way back to Belfast, Ireland. All the Dunns are dyslexic, even though none of them would have admitted to it.
Okay.
And so he read, but like articles in Popular Mechanics and those sort of things. He had some books on a shelf that he purported to have read, but I have my doubts, and that's
Okay.
fine. Dyslexics like me, we think in pictures, and so we
Yeah.
spend our time in our right side of our brains. So yeah, so it's both reader and visualizer. It's just the mix of genetics. Yeah, music. I grew up in the late 60s, early 70s when music became a big deal. My parents, that we didn't, my father sang in the church choir. He had a lovely baritone voice. And so music was there, but it was just top 40 radio, KDKA Pittsburgh,
Okay.
that just did that sort of thing. But then I found as when I was 14, it was Johnny Cash to start with. He had a TV show, and he was
Yes.
this guy, this sort of outlaw figure in black, and I'm a young man,
Yeah.
and Johnny was all that, and I love his last compilation. And then from that, a huge Jethro Tull fan. Yeah, so somebody brought in an album once to school. It was Aqualung. And what a strange bunch of songs in and out of from folk to blues to the heavy guitar to the flute. I was like 16 years old
Yeah.
and that mix of music just vibes with me. And I was early on really into Black Sabbath. Finally, I got into radio in college and was a DJ and a music director, got offered a job with AM Records and didn't take it because I saw 40-year-old people in
Yeah.
record promotion and they didn't look very healthy. So I did teaching.
And of course, some teachers don't look that healthy either, right? Yeah.
Fair enough.
I had a writer on the other day that was a teacher, And she said, I said, hey, did you always want to be a teacher? She goes, yes, because they had summers off and I knew I could write. And I was like, okay. She ended up loving teaching and all that other stuff. But originally her thought was that would give me 2 or 3 months where I'd still be getting a check and I could focus on nothing but writing.
That's it.
Yeah.
Teaching was the next thing. And that was fine. I got a PhD in American literature and culture studies, but I just stayed teaching in high school because that age group, we just get along. It's fun.
What's changed over the years in teaching? All right, I may have
Um,
you back to do
but
that.
I'll do it, and I would love to. I can talk forever about education.
Okay.
Ask my
Well,
wife,
I'll tell
who's
you what
still
then.
teaching.
Yeah.
All of the educational questions on what to do in education have really been answered. And we can really do a beautiful job of taking care of lots of different kids. And the issue is really just people. People become teachers, and when their motivations are to be whatever the teacher was that they connected with in high school,
Yeah.
and that's what they do, and they really pay very little attention to what it is students in the room need. There we go.
So you mentioned a couple of artists. I'll let you pick which one you want to discuss. Can you remember when you discovered them and what about them spoke to you?
Oh, wow. The wild variation in music, it was just so interesting. And
Mhm.
also his like thick as a brick and passion play and
Yeah.
earlier and even all of the stuff before that, this very biting male adolescent rebellious voice that runs through his song. And just at the time, that's who I was.
Yeah.
And when I was a sophomore in high school, I got a chance to go to the Passion Play concert.
Okay.
And even my dad had to take me because I couldn't drive with my best friend Bob, although it was way too loud for my poor father. And it certainly wasn't his big band music and Glenn Miller that he grew up with.
Yeah.
He got amazed at the energy, amazed at the musicianship and the whole show that was put on. It was the beginning of multimedia. There was films
Yeah.
and all kinds of stuff going on. So it was a lot of fun. And I just followed that, went to a number of Jethro Tull concerts.
I think it's interesting you mentioned Johnny Cash because he's usually the example I give when, and this is an overgeneralization, Jeffrey, but
Oh, go
I
for it.
find most of my guests can go into one of two categories. They either really loved the music their parents played and they just expanded their horizons as they got older, or they totally rejected their parents' music, found their own, and then when they're 30, realized that guy Johnny Cash dad liked a lot, he's pretty good. And it is, I do think that as we get older, I was born in 59.
And
So
56. So there we
yeah,
go. We're really
yeah,
close.
yeah. And I often talk about that the AM clock radio was the first way I could control music in
Uh-huh.
my house, right? Because my your parents controlled the car, radio, the stereo. I was talking to a friend of mine who's 15 years younger than me, and he said, I at least had an FM clock radio. I said, ooh, you were fancy. I always think the amount of times you've seen one of your favorite bands is not a good barometer of how big of a fan you are. But
True.
do you count how many times you've seen Jethro Tull?
Oh, five.
Okay.
And I've moved around so much,
Yeah.
but I did different points in time, even here in Spokane. Everything else is good.
Yeah. One of my first musical obsessions was Brian Wilson of the Beach
Okay.
Boys.
Hmm.
And
Sure.
the last time I saw him was a couple of summers ago. He was opening for Chicago, and it had reached the point where it was mostly the backing band doing the vocals, and he did not look like he was comfortable. I was able to interview him, and he said, Brian tours for three things. One, he loves the love he gets from the audience, the joy they hearing his music. Two, the band he has backing him plays his music in a way he just enjoys. It's doing it the way he hears it in his head, and he loves room service. There you go. I'm like, then Brian Keep touring as long as you can, buddy.
Sure thing.
So I am curious, how is Bruce tied to the Whiskey Rebellion?
Bruce, I first I knew about Bruce Springsteen just because in '74 and Born to Run and all that. I remember the worry about rock and roll was dying, and that album, he was on the cover of Time magazine and all that. So that was my
Yeah,
first introduction. It was a big deal. I went to the Cleveland Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and along with Jimi Hendrix guitars and Stevie Nicks Celtic witch costumes, there were all of Bruce's handwritten lyrics and notebooks. There was a
yeah.
big display of all of that. And all of the writing was really important. And as a writer, that kicked me in the head that I needed to pay attention to all of that. And then about a year ago, I read his biography, Born to Run, Bruce
Yeah.
Springsteen. And so many people, their books are ghostwritten. And I'm sure he had a developmental editor that he worked with a
Mhm.
little bit. But you can tell the man's a writer. He just is. And in his biography, he says, I'm a good guitar player, but I'm not a good god. And I can sing, but I'm not Adele. I'm not Michael Bublé. That's not my kind of voice.
Mhm.
What I really was going to chase was songwriting. And I was really going to chase that. So when I got done with the first draft of Whiskey Rebel, often I've written all the way through, but I need to go back and write a first or second chapter, something where the reader is going to get an introduction to what's happening. For this one, I was stuck. I knew I needed to differentiate the speaker from the Whiskey Rebel. And the first chapter was really important because then it would set up the rest of my revisions for what was going on with those two characters. And that was exactly the time I got that biography. And I read the first paragraph or two, and I said, that's it. Once I got his voice in my head, I went back with that voice and boom, then I just started to write and it just came that way. I'll read them to you.
Oh,
I want
please.
to see if you can get it's a vibe thing.
Okay.
Here we'll start with Bruce. We'll start with this
Okay.
very good writer who I hope I could be as good as right here. So this is from his foreword. Very first word is I come from a boardwalk town where almost everything is tinged with a bit of fraud. What a good sentence.
Yes.
Oh, I got chills. Then three words. So am I. Oh my God. By 20, no race car driving rebel. I was a guitar player on the streets of Asbury Park and already a member in good standing amongst those who lie, but I held four clean aces. I had youth, almost a decade of hardcore bar band experience, a good group of homegrown musicians who were attuned to my performance style, and a story to tell.
Yes.
That's gold. Let's see if I can do as I'll try. This is the first chapter is called Explanation. I'm from the dark side of the Cascade Mountains, a place where the American dream sprouts next to the ghost pipe in the rain drenched woods. Ghost pipe, you ask? Some call it a plant, but it has no chlorophyll and looms as white as my mom's face. She's the one who buried my dad and then followed shortly thereafter. Their story, like our nation's history, is a dark romance. Interested? I'll circle back by and by. So that's
Yes.
thank you, Bruce.
Yeah, it is that, right? Like it is the tone. So supposedly, and once again, I'm a big fan of John Ford and the man who shot Liberty Valance. If the
Oh,
story is
nice
better,
movie.
yeah,
Sure.
you print the legend, right? Supposedly, and told this in interviews. He started writing when he was going to do the Super Bowl,
Okay.
and he wrote a thing, and he realized I want to leave something for my children, a
Mm-hmm.
legacy. So he started writing, and once again, the story is he brought the manuscript into the publishing house and said, "You guys published a couple of other my books. I have an autobiography. Do you guys want to publish it?"
Maybe.
Yeah, maybe. Yes, I am sure he worked with an editor, and I'm sure, but it is that he just tells so much of himself. And I've had a couple other writers on to ask, and some of them have read it, others hadn't, but I'm always interested. As a writer, how do you judge it as a book? And obviously, you judge it pretty high.
Oh, I don't know. I can't think of a biography that I've ever read that is that well written in terms of voice, of
Yes.
just him just relating episodes and
Yeah.
giving that sense of on. His first line is he tells you he's a liar, he's an entertainer,
Yeah.
he's an artist, but the trick, it's like a magic trick, and he pulls it off. And I read lots of artists' biographies and autobiographies. Many of them were wonderful. This would be the number one for me that I've ever read.
Yeah. I got lucky enough to get my wife let me go see him on Broadway. And I was thinking, how different will this be from his biography? And there was a lot in there, but it was a different story. But yes, the idea that I put on my father's clothes. I put on my father's persona. As he said in Broadway, I've never worked 5 days a week till now,
Hmm.
and I don't like it.
Exactly.
That's fascinating because if it feels to me, and I've read different interviews with writers and playwrights and directors, and if I can get the voice, like it
Hmm.
says, if I can get that voice in my head, then the rest comes.
And it
Yeah.
was written, I had to go back, and based upon that first paragraph and then the following paragraphs, I had to go back and then gently change, work on the word choice and just everything that the person telling the story was using to make it more authentic to what that was.
Jeffrey, what was the first thing you wrote where you were really proud of it?
Oh, wow. This is a story. I self-published a book of short stories called Dream Fishing the Little Spokane. It's a river that's right over the hill from me. And the personal story is my oldest son struggled with mental health issues and he passed away. Devastating. And it was such a kick in the psyche that I wanted to begin writing short stories, again, locally based, surreal things. Just write for me, for him, for whatever. And stop trying to be a writer. Stop trying to do something that other people do because you grow up reading other people and it's very hard to get all that out of your head. It's always there. So that was when I finished that, and I still love a lot of those short stories. Some of them are good literary pieces, and some are just fun and whimsical. So that was the first one that really let me know, and then it sent me back to this Radio Free Olympia that I'd written a first draft of to blow the whole thing up and start over again. So I threw out half of it and I rewrote half of it from scratch and turned it into something that I'm very proud of at this point. But it took electric shock of losing a child to who had allow me to find my voice.
Did you know you wanted to write early?
Since I was 14, at the same time I found Johnny Cash, I was writing. They just go hand in hand. I've always written. So again, we talked about the English teacher thing. It was a
Yeah.
way to combine literature and writing and do all that kind of stuff. And I
Yeah.
do literary magazines with kids and do creative writing in class and do poetry slam with kids. We had a team and all those kinds of things.
Do you ever bring music into the class as
Oh,
lyrics as poetry?
it is poetry. So
Right.
sure, you can do that. It's poetry that's meant to be supported by music or music supported by poetry. My younger son is a musician, so I have the best time. I don't have the fingers for it. I have the musician's and artist's brain, but my fine motor coordination fails me. You might say, but I always start every class the last 10 years of my teaching. I started, it was a song of the day, and every class started with a song. And that
How do you
just started everything.
how'd you pick the different songs? Yeah.
That's, and kids, what'll happen is once you start doing that, then you start getting requests.
Yeah.
And so you pay attention to that because me, again, it's the teacher thing. It's their classroom. Yes, I'm in control. I'm the adult, blah, 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 but
Yeah.
it's their space too. And so it's very important to listen to and to hear what they were doing. And if it was something that I thought was, yeah, we should all hear this. Thank you very much. Let's do that. And then we're all friends. It's all good.
Are you familiar with Little Steven's Teacher Teach Rock?
I know of it.
Yeah. Last week I interviewed someone who discovered Bruce like late. It was just maybe 5 or 6 years ago, and she's a little bit younger than us. She said that here was somebody who was giving, he says, her concern, and we'll talk more about this, is the industry is not about teaching kids, it's about selling material to school systems, is her cynical version.
Well,
Yeah. And so she said, and here is little Steven giving, he says that is worth thousands of dollars free. Just teach
right.
because he believes. He had a documentary and he said they were talking about. He says you ask the kids what they like. Someone says Beyonce. You go, oh, okay. That leads us to Detroit
Hmm.
and Aretha Franklin, which
Right.
is the civil rights movement. He says the reality is if you can find what they're interested in and music helps that, you can teach them.
What I will do is I will instantly go out and find that documentary and watch it because that's fascinating to me. But he
Yeah.
and I share very similar philosophies where you start with wherever someone is, in
Yeah.
this case, a teenager, a child, where you start there. Now you have a connection and then you build on that.
Yeah.
And every day will take you to a different place. But your job is simply to help that person build on it. And you're a resource because you just know more.
So Jeffrey, we talked a little bit about how your environment helps influence you. Do you feel, is there a genre you're most comfortable in, or have you done a little bit of everything in your writing?
I write, I've done some poetry. I have a poetry volume, hubcap collection plate, but that's based gritty. Since we all have to put names on things, which of course is an insult to art, but
Yeah,
whatever, as we do that too. You can put it on a scale with magical realism on one end and realism, gritty kind of stuff on the other end, and then it falls somewhere in there on that continuum.
yeah.
So Radio Free Olympia is just magical realism, and Wildcat is much more realistic.
Mhm.
But Whiskey Rebel, it's a different critter. The characters are much more down and out. So many of the students I've taught in small towns in Washington State come from very rough backgrounds and interact. They change you, you change them. That's the nature of living. And so these characters come out of a lot of experience with students who live much closer to the bone. One of the responses from a developmental editor to Whiskey Rebel while I was finishing it up was that didn't understand the characters and why they made their decisions. And I said, that's because people in their situations don't have, they're not trying to self actualize, they're trying to get by today. And they make decisions in ways that don't make sense to middle class people. They just don't. And so some of that's true, but then I needed to give the reader some more sense of that since most readers tend to be middle class readers. And so that was the challenge. And I think I accomplished that.
Is there a genre that you want to work in that you haven't yet?
Not really. And what, in terms of reading, I don't read in the genre I write in very much,
Okay.
if hardly at all. I love Sherman Alexie, and there's a few other writers that write. Tom Robbins, who just passed away. I love Tom Robbins stuff. But
Mhm.
Richard Brautigan was my first love. And but what I do is I read an awful lot of nonfiction. I read biographies. I read a lot of nature books.
Okay.
I just finished a book on vultures. I'm reading a book on dragonflies. A lot of art history. I want to know geology. All of that stuff I want to pull from into the fiction.
Yeah.
In Radio Free Olympia, the developmental editor was a person who usually does science books, and she was a park ranger.
Yeah.
But I wanted her feedback on whether the hikes through the Olympic Mountains of Washington State were realistic because
Mhm.
she knew that stuff like the back of her hand. And that's what I wanted, the realism part of it.
Okay, that's interesting. The Little Steven documentary is good. So, what should I have asked you that I haven't?
Oh, The last thing, what does Mary do at the end?
That is how I end every podcast.
My son Bet, he's a musician, and he'll tell you he's not studied at anything, but he was just born with this sense of art and photography and
Yeah.
music. He's just really good. He's not a giant Bruce fan, but he listened to the song and he read the lyrics and whatever, and we went back and forth with a beer. Here's the answer.
Hold on. Don't give me the answer yet. I always like to
Okay.
set it up in
Oh,
case
we got a
you're,
setup. Cool.
yes, we do. And you'll love this. In case you are a fan of Jeffrey's or a class student, and this is your first time, I end every podcast with what I call the Mary question. Jay Armstrong was an honors English teacher in the Philadelphia area. He's now retired, but when he was teaching, every year he would have his honors English class read Thunder Road as if it was a poem. And they
Oh,
would
cool.
spend a day or day and a half discussing the imagery Bruce explores, the themes compared to Robert Frost, The Road Not Taken, Mary Going on there. And then at the end, he would ask the class the question, does Mary get in the car? And there was no right answer. Does Mary get
Okay.
in the car at the end of Thunder Road?
Okay. Here my answer to be honest. And after and I can see absolutely as a teacher using those lyrics. That's perfectly thumbs up. It's the song is really a trying to talk her into it song, which is so many songs, so many guy songs
Yeah.
in the world are trying to talk a girl into going out with them and doing whatever. There we go. And it opens with this very, in my mind, strikes me as a Bonnie and Clyde situation. So in his biography, Bruce says he was a huge fan of the 1955 film The Heart of the Hunter. And this guy has a very evangelical, serial killer, Harry Powell feel to him. The guy in the song opens by talking a lot about faith and magic, crosses and redemption, and it's no accident that her name is Mary. There you go. At least brought up as a good Catholic.
Yes.
The only question is, will she be Bonnie Parker and go down in a hail of bullets, get in the car? Or will she be Willa in the movie, who, like so many others by Harry Powell, was killed? Again, she gets in the car. There's another ending, neither of them good. Or is this Mary Magdalene who knows this guy ain't no Jesus, and what with all the redemption that he says, all the redemption that he's got is beneath his dirty old hood. But unfortunately, the Marys of this working class world are damned if they do, and they're damned if they don't, because for both her and the guy, the American dream is really just another con.
I love that answer.
And how does she read this guy? I was thinking through different sorts of things,
Yeah.
and he said, Dad, she's not even in here. This is just him projecting his own feelings on her. And I said, oh, interesting. I do listen. I went back, I read the
Yeah.
lyrics again, I listened to the song again,
Yeah.
and then I read this to him, and he said, that's not exactly what I meant.
I don't know if you've read Deliver Me from Nowhere, which is Warren Zane. It's a new book he wrote. It's
Have
the
not.
making of Bruce Springsteen's Nebraska. Warren wrote it as in, okay, Bruce had his first true commercial success with The River and Hungry Heart. He had a top
Right.
40 hit. And then you skip an album and he does a Born in USA and he becomes In the Atmosphere, Spaceship. He's just huge. But
Right.
why did he have to do Nebraska between it? Why did he have the need to take a step backwards before the step forward? And the book is about that. And the new Bruce movie that's they're filming is based on the book, that time period.
Oh,
Warren Zane said a similar answer. He said, just, and I cannot remember the girl, so I'm going to say Alice. Just like Alice Smith in high school, I asked her out 1,000 times and I never spoke to her. It
right.
was just this vision. And in
Hmm.
my mind, I would have that, I would ask her out, and I never had the courage. That Mary doesn't even know this guy.
Also possible.
Yeah, yeah. And I thought that was a really good answer. About 50 people say she gets in the car. About 50 people say she doesn't. Jay, who was the one who I always give credit to, think she doesn't. And he says, and I don't like the song as much if I think she does. Because his whole premise is every time you make a choice, you're denying something, right? When you
Hmm.
make a choice, you
Sure.
either pick something and then
Right.
something else you don't pick. And he said, I think she's too afraid to make that choice. I think
Okay.
it's safer to stay. And this was probably 7 years ago when he first was on the podcast. And so now it's been yeah, I think it's an interesting way to end the conversation because
Absolutely.
even people who are huge Bruce fans have different answers. And by the way, I had a lady who had never heard the song, didn't hear it, just read the lyrics. And she sent me this graphic. Oh my God, if she gets in that car, he's killing her. Why
Yes.
are you sending me this serial killer song?
I think there's a huge difference between reading and listening to that song
Yeah,
because the song does that Bon Jovi thing
yeah,
where it supports this romantic vision,
yes,
but the lyrics cut right against that. And
yeah.
I think you really need, and like you're rooting for them when if you just read the lyrics cold, you just go ick.
And then one of my other favorite answers is a guy said, if it's the E Street Band, she gets in that car because it ends
Yes.
triumphantly. It's when he plays it by himself. No, she doesn't get in the car because
Mhm.
he ends the song with he's
Right.
depressed and tired. And I said, that's awesome. That's just such a good
And
answer.
and a good answer for why he made Nebraska.
Yes,
Because
absolutely.
he says he wanted to do the exact opposite of everything he had done before.
Yeah. And he said, I won't spoil much of the book, but there was a great line where he said, when he brought the songs to the band, his characters, he
Hmm.
was losing his characters as the
Hmm.
band played the songs. Any final thoughts before I get you out of here, Jeffrey?
My novel, Whiskey Rebel, since many of you are Bruce fans, it shares his sense of relationship with social class and the American dream and his embrace of the working
Yeah.
class being taken for granted and therefore it's this invisible bedrock of America. There's a thing there where they work together, where they're dovetail. And I'm proud of that.
It is Whiskey Rebel, Jeffrey Dunn, available everywhere where books are sold. Coming out on May 6th is what
Yes,
I
sir.
see on
Yeah.
Amazon.
Ebook too.
If someone
Yep.
wants to reach you, what's the best way if they want to get more information or
Yeah.
to find more about you?
Jeffrey Dunn Spokane, where I live, jeffreydunnspokane.com, or just at Jeffrey Dunn Spokane and all the social media stuff, Instagram, Facebook.
Jeffrey, this was a blast.
Thank you. Oh, blast. So thank you so much, Jesse.
I am going to follow up and we'll have you back later in the summer, maybe. And let's do an education episode. I think
Oh,
that'd
it.
be fascinating. That'd be
Yes,
great.
sir.
All right, listeners, go check out the website, check out the book, let them know you heard it on Set Listing Bruce. For now, I want everyone to be safe. I want you to be kind, and we'll talk soon. Goodbye.
Thank you.
There we go, another episode. I'm about to go through a couple of things where you can reach me and give me feedback. So if you want to skip this, I understand. But I do hope you check it out every once in a while. I'm available on Twitter at Jesse Jackson DFW. The show is available at SetListingBruce. You can send me an email, setlistingbruce@gmail.com. You can send me a voicemail at 469-249-2442. I am currently doing a few other podcasts. Perfectly Good Podcast, John Hyatt from A to Z, where Sylvan Groth and I discuss every John Hyatt song in alphabetical order. My Babylon 5 podcast is Last Best Hope for Conversation, where Lou, Karen, and I discuss every episode of Babylon 5 in chronological order. I still am doing Next Stop Everywhere, the Doctor Who podcast with my brother in time, Charles Skaggs. And then finally, How Many Podcasts, the only podcast on the internet that counts, where my buddies and I discuss pop culture. You can go to our Patreon page and support the podcast for as little as $1 a month. You can go to our Facebook page, and please, please go to iTunes or wherever you get your podcast and leave a 5-star rating and review for all of the podcasts that I'm doing. It's okay if you don't listen to them, but if you subscribe and rate, it really will make my day better. Thank you, and I will talk to you soon. You just heard the fun talking, hard rocking, music loving, album ranking, fan thinking, joy spreading, lyric reading, story sharing podcast that is the one, the only Set Listing Bruce. The theme for Set Listing Bruce was written by David Rosen, used by permission.